Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. In an earlier video, we covered about FastAPI. To be specific, we covered about files, forms, and error handling. Today, we're going to be studying dependencies. Furthermore, since our project has gotten a bit bigger, let me just show it to you. Here, as you can see, our project or our code base has gotten a bit bigger. We're going to learn how to split all of our routes into multiple files for file or project organization. So now with that being said, let's first start with the first part of this video, which is about dependency injection. So let's get started. Okay, so now let's talk about dependencies. What is dependency injection? Well, I would rather explain dependencies using an analogy. So for example, let's say you're managing a pizza shop and here you're the chef. And as a chef, you will have to do a lot of stuff. For example, going to the local farm, getting your tomatoes, vegetables, and furthermore, getting the cheese from the dairy. Furthermore, you will also have to check or validate the quality of your ingredients. And then at the end, prepare the pizza and make your customers happy. So in this case here, you can see that the chef or you are doing way too much. This is where FastAPI comes in. You can think of FastAPI in this case as a kitchen manager. So before you, the chef, touches the oven, FastAPI or the manager calls the suppliers for you. In this case, I would call it a dependency function. Furthermore, the manager also makes sure that the ingredients are fresh. Here, I would call it validation. And then when everything's done, set everything or the ingredients on the counter for you to prepare the pizza. In this case, I would call it injection. In other words, the values of the previous functions or the previous operations were injected into your function or your operation. So as a result, you would just grab the ingredient and start baking. Your life is now easier. So that's how dependencies work in a nutshell. They essentially make your life easier by getting the values of previous functions or previous operations and inject them into your project code base. So now with that being said, let's now discuss what dependencies are mainly used for within FastAPI. So for example, dependencies can be really useful for shared logic. So in our case, supply validation and injection in other parts of the project without causing any repetition. Furthermore, we can have shared database connections. So this means that the project can share database connections and call SQL queries. Furthermore, we can also use dependencies to enforce security, authentication, and role requirements. So now that you know what dependency injection is, let's now write some code. Alright, so here I am in VS Code, and this is all of the code we've written so far within the FastAPI series. Let's create a new branch and let's call it part 4, like so. So now let's write a very basic dependency. So here I'm going to write a very basic function which checks for passports or digital passports of a user. So it's a very basic example. So check passport dependency, like so. And then here we're going to go name. So the passport will have a name. And I'm going to do annotated of type string. And here is going to be a query like so. Whoops, query like so, comma. And then we're going to have an age. And I'm going to do annotated once again. So age is going to be a query as well. So now what we can do here is I'm going to perform some very basic validation. If name equals Hussein, so basically if it's me, and then my age is 23. So then I'm going to return a message, passport is valid. Otherwise, if it's not valid, I'm just going to go return. Actually, not return, let's do a raise HTTP exception with the status code of 401. And here the detail is going to be user not allowed on board. And now let's build an endpoint for this dependency. So app.get, and here we're going to go check passport and then async def check passport. So now let's use this dependency. Looks like I got the spelling of passport wrong here. And then anyways. So now to use this dependency, we're going to go message. And the type of message is going to be a dictionary. Like so. So I'm going to go annotated. And it's dictionary. Actually, it's better to change it to a string. So I'm going to remove this like so. And then here, this curly bracket like so. And then let's change it to string. And then to refer to this dependency, I'm going to go depends and then check passport dependency. That's it. So now let me import the depends function, and it's going to be imported from FastAPI. And then here I'm going to go return and status, and the value of status is going to be injected from the check passport dependency function. So it's message. So now let me explain what's happening here. Since our check passport function is depending on the check passport dependency function, what's going to happen is that this endpoint is going to run this function first, and then the value of this function is going to be injected within my endpoint. The value here is going to be stored within message, and then later on I'm just going to return the value of message to the user like so. So now let's test it out. I'm just going to go FastAPI dev. So now it's running. Let me click on it. Let's go here. Okay, so now I go to the docs directory, and let's scroll all the way down here, check passport, and let's try it out. So here I'm going to write Hussein and then age of 23. So I execute, and here I get an error, user not allowed on board. So theoretically this should have worked, but I realized I made a small error here. Here it's going to go return passport is valid. So now let's execute once again. Let's see what we get. Here, as you can see, our code works. So let's change the values again. So I'm going to go age to 24, and now we get an error. We get a 401 error telling us that the user is not allowed on board. That means that our code works. We can even change from query to body. So let's do body like so, and body here as well. And then I import from FastAPI. So now let's test it again. I refresh, try out. So then my name is going to be Hussein, and then my age is going to be 23. So now I execute. Whoops, looks like I have to change it to post. So here I can just go app.post. So let's go back, refresh, and then try it out once again. Hussein and then 23. Execute function, and hopefully this should work. Great. So as you can see, our code works. One problem I found out while working with dependencies is that they behave a bit strange with body fields, and I'm going to show it to you now. So for example, let's say you just have one field or one body field within your dependency. So I'm going to do it like so. So let's remove age, and I remove this check here, and then test it out. I refresh. So here, as you can see, I don't have a JSON body within Swagger API, but let's change it to JSON. So I remember it was name Hussein, and then I close the string, and then I execute. And here, as you can see, we have an error. Now I'm not sure why the error comes up when we have just one body field, but I'm going to show you how we can fix it. We can just go embed equals true. Now let's go back, let's refresh. And now we have the correct example schema coming up. So try it out, and then Hussein, execute. So now, as you can see, our code works. Now I'll just bring back the age field just for this tutorial, like so, and then age equals 23. Okay, so now let's move on. So now let's step up things a bit. If we want, we can even use dependencies on forms as well. And I'm going to show it to you how. So recall earlier in an earlier video, we had a form that used username and password. This time I want to refactor it to use a form model instead. So I'm going to refactor both of these fields. So class, and then login data of type base model, or it inherits from base model. So username of type string. So let's give it a field. So a title and a max length. And then I do the same for the password. So now let's use it here. So I remove this, and then here I can go login data of type annotated, and here I go login data, comma, and then form like so. So now let's use this login data. So here I can go login data, and then I apply the same refactor within these lines around here and here. And then looks like we have a syntax issue. I apply a comma here, and now it works. So now let's test it out. I remember we had this login form.html. So I'm going to open this login form on my computer or within the browser. So here, let's go admin and then password. And then I browse for a file here and then log in. So here, as you can see, we have an error. It says that login data is missing. However, we are supplying login data via our login form. So what's the issue here? Well, the problem is when we use login data like so, FastAPI expects us to find a single form field called login data. However, as you can see, we have username and password. So we have two fields. Furthermore, FastAPI does not automatically look for individual fields like username and password. So now to fix this, we have to use a dependency function. So to do so, I can create a function called def destructure login data like so. So now the parameters are going to be username of type annotated string and then form like so, comma, password annotated tr and then form. And then here it returns a variable of type login data like so. And then it just returns the username and password using the login data class. So now let's use this dependency. So here I'm just going to go, instead of form, I'm going to go dependency, or sorry, depends, and then destructure login data. That's it. So now let me explain what's happening here. Here I built a dependency function called destructure login data. It's getting the username and password from our login form fields or our login form HTML file. So now when this dependency gets these values, the username and password, it injects these values within my login data variable. Furthermore, I'm just printing it out and doing some basic validation. That's it. So let's test it out. Hopefully we should see our form working. So let's go back and let me refresh. So it's password. And then let's log in. Here, as you can see, now our code works once again, just like before. So FastAPI also allows us to do nested dependencies, and I'm going to show it to you now. So let's scroll down. Let's create a dependency. So it's just a very simple function. Let's call it getDB, and it just returns an array. And yeah, this seems fine for now. And then let's create another function. Let's call it getUser from DB. Looks like Copilot is helping us today, but I'm going to remove it here. And then here I go, user ID of type int. Actually, let's do annotated of type int, and it's coming from query. And then if I want, I can also specify this function as a dependency. So here I can go db of type annotated, and the getDB function returns an array. So here I can go list, comma, and then I specify a dependency using depends. And then I put in my function like so. So within the body of this function, I can just simply go return db. And then within this db array, I'm just going to return the index of user ID or the user with this index. So now let's create an endpoint for it. So app.get/current user. So async def current user. So the user is coming from the get user from DB function. So annotated, and the type of user according to this dependency is a dictionary. So I go dict, comma, depends, get user from DB. So for this endpoint, this function is my dependency. That's it. And then at the end, I just return current user like so. So it might seem a bit hard to understand, but let me try my best to explain it to you here. So what's happening here is we have an endpoint, and this endpoint depends on my get user from DB function. So what's going to happen here is the current user function is going to execute this function. However, since get user from DB relies on the getDB function, the getDB function is going to execute first. So let me just write a comment. So here I'm going to go getDB runs first, and then get user from DB runs next. The value of get user from DB is injected into current user. Here let's add to the sentence, the value of getDB is injected into get user from DB. That's it. So now let's test it out. Let me go back to Swagger. Let's refresh. Let me close this one and let's use current user. Let's try it out. Let me get the first user and then I execute. So here, as you can see, our code works. We can make it better by returning an exception as well. So to do so, here I can go try and then an except error. So let me fix my code. Here it's indent, and this seems fine for now. So let's test out this code. So I know 0 works. Let's try, I don't know, 50, and we should get an error. Here, as you can see, it says user not found. Actually, it should not be user not found. It should be out of bounds. Or it's better to say we don't have many users. So that's a better message. Now let's move on to the next subtopic here. So we can also use classes as dependency, and I'm going to show you two now. So for example, sometimes you might want to pass a specific value into the dependency logic yourself. So for example, earlier we created a dependency that checks if a user has a certain name and a certain age. And there's a better way to do all of this, and I'm going to show you two now. So let's scroll down. Let's create another class for our dependency. So class passport checker. So for our dependency, it needs an init or a constructor. So self, comma, name of type string, age of type int, and then self.name equals name, and then self.age equals age. Looks like there's unnecessary code. Let me remove this, and then let's use it. So app.get / check passport class, then async def check passport class. So let's do a message. So basically what we're doing here, and it's going to be of type annotated string. It depends on the passport checker class. So yeah, basically everything's very similar. However, one issue is that depends wants a callable as a parameter. Here we have a class. So to convert our class to a callable, here we're going to go def call, and then here it's going to go self, and then the name annotated. So I want the name to come from the query like so. So basically here we have name to be body, but I want query, comma, age to be from the query itself as well, sorry. And then here I'm checking if the name from the query matches the name of my passport checker instance. And I'm also checking the same for age. And if they both are equal, I return a success message. Otherwise, I return an exception. And then since classes allow for customizability, here I can go name equals Hussein, comma age equals 23. Whoops, not 32, it's 23. So here this means that the name of this instance is Hussein and the age of this instance is 23. And when I call my passport checker dependency, my function here will check if the name from the query is equals Hussein and the age of my query is equals 23. And then it performs validation accordingly. Anyways, with that being said, let's test it again. Let me refresh. Let's close this. And now we have class. So instead of Hussein, let's do Steve. Whoops, Steve, like so. And then age to be 15. Let's execute. And here, as you can see, we now have an error. That means that our code works. So basically, in a nutshell, some of you might be confused on when to choose a class and when to choose a function like so as a dependency. So well, in a nutshell, functions allow you for simple or one-off logic. So for example, just getting the current user. And classes allow you to get proper configuration. So for example, the name and age, or when you need to maintain internal state. So that's it. Let's now move on to the next subtopic, which is yields. So basically, if you're not sure about the yield keyword, it allows you to perform extra steps after finishing your dependency. This means that when your dependency has been finished executing, you guys can perform cleanup functions. An example of cleanup can be to close a database connection when processing has been complete. So let's now use yield. And I'm going to reuse my get user from DB dependency. So instead of returning, here I can go yield like so. So basically, you can think of this as a database connection, and as a cleanup function, we're going to do finally, and just let's do a print for now, since we don't have a proper database setup. So I'm just going to do a print. So cleaning up resources, that's it. And that was very easy as well. So let's test it out. So I refresh like so, and we had current user. Let's try it out, and hopefully this should work. So user ID of 0. I execute and it still works just like before. Now let's go back and notice within my terminal here, we have cleaning up resources coming up within the console. So this means that my finally block or my cleanup code block ran. Furthermore, let me also explain the execution flow when we have the yield keyword. So what happens is the get user from DB function runs, and the code will run until it will hit the yield command. So let me introduce a logging statement. So print one getting user, and then this dependency will inject the value of this dictionary into my root here. And for a moment, the execution is paused. And then afterwards, when the value has been successfully gotten, FastAPI resumes execution, and then it will run the finally block. So then let me show you the order like so. So print, I'm going to do print here. So to user gotten. And then when successfully everything's been done, here I can just go print 3 finished getting user. So now let's test it out. Let's go back to Swagger so that you guys could see the execution flow. So let's enter a value, execute. Now we have a value. And now here, as you can see, the execution flow in action. Okay, so now with that being said, let's now move on to the last subtopic of dependencies, which is global dependencies. So basically, if we want, we can have a certain dependency running on all of our routes here. So let me scroll all the way up and let's create a dependency. So let's create a dependency called dep verify header, which basically reads a header, very, very simple. And let's do X token annotated type string, and it's going to be header this time. Let me fix my imports, and I import from FastAPI. And then within the body here, I check if X token is not equals a certain value, I return an exception. And now to use this dependency, we can manually enter this dependency into all of our routes here. However, that will be very painful and it would be very tedious as well. However, FastAPI gives us a better way to declare a global dependency. So to do so, I'll just bring app down like so. And here I can go dependencies equals, and then it accepts an array, and it depends on the verify header function, and hopefully it should work. So let's go back, the Swagger API, let's refresh, and here as you can see, we now have a header coming up. Let's see other routes as well. So for example, the root route, it also asks for an X token header, and yeah, this means that our code works. So let's try it out. And I remember we had fake super secret token, and then I execute, and we have a 200 status code coming up. And then instead of the correct value, let's do, for example, wrong token. I execute, and here as you can see, we have a 400 error. That means that our code works. Great. That means that global dependencies now works for our project. So now this brings us to the last topic of this video. This time, notice that our project or this main.py file has gotten very big. If we want, we can split this file into multiple files. So let's do so now. So I'm going to create a new folder. Let's call it routers. So we're going to group some of our routes here, and then let's scroll up and let's start by the say hello route. So I'm going to create a new file. Let's call it say hello.py, and then here we can go from FastAPI import API router, and then let's go back to main.py, and then let me just copy both of these. That's because they both start with the say hello route. So I'm going to copy both of them and paste it here. And here I can go router equals API router. So the prefix is going to be say hello. So it's slash say hello. And then we can have a tag here for organizational purposes equals say hello, like so. And then let's fix our code here. So here it's router. And now since we have the say hello prefix, I'll just remove this like so and do the same here. So now let's use this router. To do so, I scroll up and go from routers import say hello, like so. And let's remove both of these since we're already declaring them here. And then here I can go app dot include router say hello dot router. So now let's test this out. Let me refresh, and hopefully we should see the say hello routes come up just like before. That's great to see. So now as homework, I will ask you guys to convert all of our routes within this file into API routers, since in this video it would take too long and repetitive. But another great thing about FastAPI is that we can even specify router level dependencies. So to demonstrate this behavior, I'm going to use my laptop route. So let me scroll down, which is this one. So quite a few laptop routes here. So I create a new file. Let's call laptop.py. Whoops, it's not pt, it's py. Let me rename. It's .py, like so. And then let me just copy this code here, paste it here, and here's laptop, and the tag is going to be laptop as well. And let's copy this code, this one and this one and this one as well. Let me remove this and paste it here. So let's fix our imports. So first of all, let's just fix our code for now. And then instead of app, it's going to be router. Whoops. Router like so. Router here, router here. Okay, that's it. And going back to main.py, I remember we had another laptop route here. So for our form, let me cut this and paste it here as well. So it's router.post. And let's import all of these from FastAPI. So laptop form is not there. Let me go back, remove this one, and then paste it here. And let me fix my imports. So from typing, I import annotated, and form is imported from FastAPI. So now let's fix this code once again. So it's laptop removed here and laptop removed here as well, and here as well. Okay, so far so good. Let's now declare a dependency for our router. So here I can go def, and let's create a dependency that checks if we have a laptop field in the query. So laptop query checker, and here I'm going to go laptop name annotated of type string, and it's going to be query. So I want to check if laptop name is not equals framework 13. So then I raise an exception like so. So let me import this from FastAPI, and then let's specify this dependency within my router. So here I'm going to go comma dependencies, and then basically the process is very similar to declaring a global dependency that we were doing on the top around here, like so. So then here I can go depends laptop query checker. So now let me fix my imports here and here. So I import from FastAPI, and then let's go back to Swagger. Let's collapse this, and we should have the laptop field. Whoops, looks like I did not add it to my main file. So here I can go app.include router, whoops, include underscore router, laptop.router. So let me scroll up, say hello, and then comma laptop. That's it. Let's go back, let's refresh, and now here we have our laptop fields. So now let's expand this panel, and here as you can see we now have our laptop name query come up here. Let's collapse this one and see more. So laptop name comes up here as well, and laptop name comes up here as well. So this means that our dependency, our laptop query checker dependency, is working on this whole route. Anyways, I would also like to test it, so let's try it out. So laptop name is framework 13, and then we also have an X token, which was this one, fake super secret token. This is our global dependency, and let's just execute. And now that we've executed it, here as you can see we now have a 200 code. So let's scroll up, let's test it further. So instead of laptop name being framework 13, let's do framework 12, execute this. And now here, as you can see, we now have a 400 error code. This means that our code works. That's it for today. In this video, you guys learned everything there is about dependency injection. Furthermore, you guys learned about routers and how to split your main file into other specific files for API routers. If you guys have any questions, let me know within the comment section below. Till then, see you later and bye bye.